Yes, so this is welcome to our first series of Eris meetup. I think most of you are from Blockchain U, right? So it looks like alumni reunion plus Eris meetup. We're glad to have Ethan here from Eris team. For those of you, I assume most of you are familiar with Eris. Eris is a full stack development stack, for decentralized application, the server, chain, IPFS integrated. So we'd like to kick off this series. We'll probably do it in the formats. By the way, I'm Tom, for those of you who haven't met me. I'm Tom from Koinify. I run a startup on decentralized application. We're really excited about Eris. It's really cool stuff. And we'll probably do in either weekly or bi-weekly format, depending on how much, I think, content we have. The first few sessions, what we're thinking, Andy and I are the co-organizers, and we're probably going to do introductory sessions. And afterwards, we're thinking about doing some hack nights or hack evenings. You're welcome to provide other ideas of how to run this meetup most effectively. But we definitely would like everyone to kind of hack their own stuff. I think so far you have 1 or 2 projects on Eris.
They're mostly internal, but yeah.
Mostly internal. Awesome. And do you want to add anything?
No, I think it's something that
You want to introduce yourself?
yeah, I'm Andy. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Ethereum meetup, and I got talking with Tom, and we got on the Eris Slack, and a lot of people wanted to have a dedicated Eris meetup because the stack is a little bit different than Ethereum, and we're really happy to have Eris Industries with us tonight. Ethan probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but he does specialize in Felonious, which is their maker blockchain. So that's pretty cool.
Cool. So, cool, yeah. So I'm Ethan. I work for Eris. We're a distributed computing dev tools company. Our focus is, right now, is mostly on building tools that make it easier for people to grok these new distributed systems and to actually get started using them and using them together, right? Because there's so many different systems coming out, and we're trying to build sort of integrated middleware to make it easy for you to write programs in JavaScript that can talk to whatever different crazy backend you want. So I figured I'd start off giving the same talk I gave at Crypto Economicon. For those of you that were there, I'm sorry. I could skip it if you want, but I'll just kind of run through it. It gives an idea of sort of our perspective and where we came from and what we're doing. So the title was kind of a mockery of what that conference was doing in some respects. So the opening presentation at that conference was called "What is Crypto Economics?" It was put on by a good friend of mine, Vlad Zamfir, who's trying to do a very intense, rigid formalism of this nascent field so we can start to understand it and model it and build up very simple models to get better grips on what does it mean to have a secure blockchain, what does it mean to have a crypto economic protocol, and so on. So he gave a really nice talk on crypto economics, but the problem that I kind of have with crypto economics today is that these systems it's almost like they're hindered by their own sovereignty, right? It's like you create a new crypto economic system, something like Bitcoin, and it's so well defined internally and so consistent with itself that it's almost impossible to get in and out, right? Like the on and off ramps between Bitcoin and the dollar are tedious and regulation filled and scary and troublesome. Like the first time I tried to buy Bitcoin, I ended up having to drive to Toronto to hand a guy money to do it, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't buy the internet money over the internet, right? It drove me nuts. And it hasn't really changed that much today. I mean, it's there's more exchanges, it's easier in some respects to get the stuff and to cash out. I mean, I operate an ATM, a Bitcoin ATM in Ontario because otherwise it was impossible. You had to go meet a guy, right? Exchanges are always shutting down. Every so often they come up. You don't know if you can trust them, whatever. And as much as we like to think that this is this magical anarcho-libertarian philosophy or technology, in the meantime, our fiat currencies and our governments and our legal systems aren't going away anywhere anytime soon, right? They're here to stay, and they're not going to go away without a fight. So one of the clever things I heard someone say the other day at the Stanford conference was, we need to give them being the fiat systems, a mechanism by which they could step down gracefully, right? Rather than sort of attacking them with, we have new technology that's going to make you irrelevant. Although it might be true, we don't want to start a fight because they have lots of guns and stuff, right? And more than us, as much as we're 3D printing and so on. We don't want it to get to that, right? So we need to think carefully about how to provide them a sort of avenue to step down gracefully. And I thought that was really well said and something that we all need to keep in mind. of course, I got up on stage a little bit later and just sort of ran my mouth about how broken Bitcoin is and about all the problems with it. And in particular, to some extent, about how Ethereum and some of the research behind Ethereum is aiming to solve it. And one thing I actually ended up suggesting was that we could save Bitcoin by moving it to proof of stake, registering all the validators with the state, and punishing them legally if they fuck around. Sorry, if they screw around. Which is a totally contrarian opinion, and it's one that I'm not even sure I take it seriously myself, but it's again, some kind of a bridge, so to say, building bridges between the old systems and the new one, and using the best of both worlds, right? The thing is, the legal system is broken and there's all kinds of problems with it, but so often the problems are like little subtleties about what is and is not admissible evidence in court, right? You might know something, but you can't bring it forward because it's not admissible. Whereas if that thing was on a blockchain, there's no inadmissibility. Anything that happens on a blockchain is going to be admissible, right? So if we have much more of our business logic and accounting operating on these chains that are like transparent and public and authenticated effectively, then there's no denying that. And so the courts could actually become a pretty effective system. And of course, after I made this statement, the person sitting next to me commented, "You work for a company run by lawyers, correct?" And of course, that's true. But I like to say that I came to this conclusion on my own because I'd like to be a practical individual. Anyways, blockchains are here to stay, but we want to figure out what is this near-term balance. Okay, so this is a fun point. Cryptoeconomic systems, lately especially, are starting to become defined as systems that provide cryptographic proofs and economic incentives for the verification of code execution. I.e., there is some economic guarantee that you can validate using cryptography that tells you some code is going to run in a certain way, right? And with Bitcoin, it means the network is going to process the transactions as you think they're going to process the transactions, right? When I send Bitcoin from person to person, you have a guarantee that it's going to execute in a certain way, right? Now, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and especially the idea that Facebook is almost cryptoeconomic in a sense, right? If we just remove this word cryptographic proof, then what Facebook offers is very similar. Facebook has a massive economic incentive to guarantee that the code that they're running is going to execute in a particular way. And if it doesn't, they're going to lose users, or there's going to be a shitstorm on Twitter or something, right? It's going to be bad news for Facebook. The big sort of thing between the two is that allegedly in a cryptoeconomic system, anyone can audit the code. Anyone can audit the code execution and come to this sort of verification on their own terms and set out, run a Bitcoin node and say, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Am I detecting anything, right? Whereas with Facebook, you can't really do that unless you become an engineer and go get hired and move down to Menlo Park and work there and actually audit the code base yourself, which is doable. Now here's where it gets really interesting though, because how many engineers does Facebook have, and how many people are currently running validator nodes on the Bitcoin network, right? So there's about 7,000 people running validator nodes. I'm not sure exactly how many engineers Facebook has, but if the block size in Bitcoin gets much bigger and the number of nodes go down, we could very well have them even out so that the number of people running Bitcoin nodes is the same number of engineers that might be auditing the Facebook code base. And at that point, which system is offering you greater security that the code is going to execute in a particular way, right? And that's a funny sort of question I like to ask and troll Bitcoiners with. They think their protocol is some grand holy grail of decentralization, but it's really not. So this question arises: what does Facebook even have to gain from a blockchain? And it's an interesting question, and a lot of people want to say, yeah, move Facebook onto a blockchain, but that's not going to work. That's crazy, right? Because blockchains, as we know right now, they don't scale very well, and a lot of people are working on that. So what I would say is that Facebook, the application, has virtually nothing to gain from moving to a blockchain. Whereas Facebook, the organization, might. Because Facebook, the organization, has all kinds of internal ledgers, it's got to keep track of salaries and payouts and dividends and so on, right? And moving that kind of logic onto a blockchain, or onto some kind of authenticated data structure that other people could audit, and that could pay out dividends right away and incentivize engineers or even the community in weird sort of ways, that could be a wonderful thing. So, this is kind of the perspective that Eris has started to take a little bit. That people are I don't really want to say scared, but I guess scared of sort of these decentralized autonomous organizations that are threatening to, take over the world and remove control from any organization or human. So what we're thinking is, okay, let's not remove all the control just yet. We'll give you blockchains that you can still lock down, don't worry. But it's kind of like a trick we're playing to get you to adopt this technology so that when the big bad public blockchains, as I like to call them, are more mature and more scalable and a little better off, it'll be less intrusive to actually move businesses onto them because they've already sort of started to become accustomed with the technology. So that's sort of the idea that Eris has been playing with in the sort of niche we aim to target. A lot of people will come after us on the internet and say, don't you guys know anything about like database technology? Blockchains aren't useful for this. There's too much overhead. Blah 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 blah. And in a lot of cases, they're probably right. In the context of a fully centralized organization where it's just about their internal ledgers and their internal accounting, yeah, maybe a blockchain doesn't make sense. Maybe it does. Or maybe at the very least, some of the Merkle tree structures, the authenticated database structures, make sense because it makes it easier to audit. And every once in a while, a company gets audited, and that can cost a lot of money. And there's all kinds of efficiency trade-offs there, right? But on the other hand, something that does seem to make a lot of sense are business deals and contracts with many or multiple parties that aren't all within the same organization, but that are all working towards the same goal. Right, so you can imagine like some construction deal where there's like lawyers and architects and designers and the actual construction teams and the local governments and so on that all have to sort of negotiate and agree on things, and neither one of them really fully trusts all the others, even though they have this sort of incentive-aligned goal, right? So that's the kind of situation where a semi-locked down distributed database like a blockchain might actually make some sense, and that's the sort of circumstance that we're looking to try and target. In the meantime, though, we really grew up as people just playing around on Ethereum, and it was difficult, and we were building contracts that were too big to run within their gas limit, and there are all kinds of weird subtleties about the protocol that we just needed to get rid of so that we could make progress with the actual dApps we were building, or the contracts we were writing. So, this was back in the summer. The original Eris team of Preston, Casey, and Dennis, also known as Tyler, built Project Douglas, which was in competition for a bounty that was put up for software that could replace the Bitcoin Foundation. So this was like a Reddit suite that ran on top of Ethereum. It was probably the biggest dApp written until that time. And then, they got some interest by some VC and they started a company, and now we're doing our thing. So most of our focus has been on building tools sort of in and around the Ethereum ecosystem to make it easier to work with these chains, make it easy to deploy dApps and transactions and actually develop, have like sort of a developer environment. But then there's also these ideas that maybe these things will be actually useful in larger scale circumstances of multi-party deals and so on. So the basic products we have, of course everything's open source, that some of which I'll demonstrate today, are EPM, which is the Eris package manager. It's sort of grown into more than just a package manager. It's more like a chain manager or a database manager. It's basically a chain agnostic tool that allows you to work with different blockchains sort of really nicely from the command line. And I had this really great experience over the last week of, how many of you know about Tendermint? Cool, so basically everyone. So Tendermint is like the first legitimate, real, secure proof-of-stake proposal that actually has a code base. And so as of a few days ago, there's now an EPM module wrapper for Tendermint. So using the exact same commands and setup that I would use to deploy things on Ethereum and to work with an Ethereum chain, I can now use on a Tendermint chain, right? So that was a really nice experience to see that this actually works, and we actually can have these generalized tools that will work with multiple backends. So the D server is more of a front end for EPM. And it's not just for talking to blockchains, but also for distributed file systems. So the weird thing about Ethereum is, so these Ethereum contracts and contracts running on blockchains, they're very expensive, right? Because everyone has to run all the computations, and you're Merkelizing trees all the way, and always checking signatures, and there's just all kinds of expenses, and the gas costs reflect that, right? So obviously you can't store too much data on chain. You need off-chain solutions for actually storing the bulk of your data that you'll just track with a hash in the contract. So IPFS, which is this amazing file system, distributed file system technology, is a perfect use case for this, but there's no really nice way to get the two to talk to each other. So that's what the D server does right now. You can write in JavaScript, you can write apps in JavaScript, and it gives you backends to IPFS and to Ethereum, or to Thelonious, or now to Tendermint, whatever you want, right? And so you can do simple things like post stuff on IPFS, save the hash to an Ethereum contract, give someone that hash, or the address of that contract later, and then they can go track down the hash and pull the thing from IPFS. And so right now, basically the whole rest of Eris is working on a distributed YouTube app, which we call Together, where it's basically this system. All the videos are stored in IPFS, every video gets a contract on Ethereum, and you can go fetch them by looking up the there's like a main root contract that lists all the other ones where the videos are, and you can go look them up, grab the hash, ask IPFS from it, and it'll stream it right into your browser.
Is that open source as well?
Yeah, so it's still in the works, so it's not like fully functional yet, but you can see the code. It's eris-ltd/2gather on GitHub. Yeah, so so we've been bogged down in Together land for a while. I'm kind of lucky enough to be low enough on the stack that.
Yeah, so I have a question on Thelonious.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So you're saying that you now support proof of stake, and
Yeah.
I guess the security in general depends on the blockchain, the internal token value to be valid enough to support the asset that built on top of it.
Sure.
So imagine you put stocks, Apple, Tesla stocks on top of the chain. What is guaranteed security of that chain?
In a Thelonious chain or in a general proof of stake chain or what?
Thelonious chain.
In a Thelonious
How do
chain.
you solve that problem of really valuable assets like
Right.
$1 billion stock?
Sure. So the idea is it depends on how you set it up and on what you want, right? So on the one hand, you can set up the chain so that only one person is allowed to mine. And if that's you, then if anyone else tries to commit anything, it just gets rejected and the whole network's like, you're not Tom, you're not allowed to mine, right? Or they won't say you're not Tom, they'll say you're not 0xABC, 7, 9, whatever. So obviously that's a very highly trusted centralized service, right? But we can do it in a way that you can have an administrative permission, or we can set it up with a bunch of people, like 7 of them that have an administrative permission, and you need all of them to sign off on something, right? Or we do a proof of stake round robin on 7 of them, whatever. And when you think about it, at the end of the day, I mean, 7 validators is kind of like on par with Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin's got 3 massive mining pools that control a huge chunk of the ecosystem. Each of them run by a dude or a few dudes, right? You control them, you control all of Bitcoin. So from that perspective, it's not that hard to equal Bitcoin security. I mean, yeah, you need the market cap to be there, but that's kind of another problem. If we can assume that people have vested enough interest that they're not going to sell out too early, then you can trust it. But it's an issue still. We launching new chains and expecting the public to assume they're secure. That's why we don't really just launch chains and put value on them. We're just playing around with these distributed applications that are running logic, right? And that's kind of a new approach to building apps. Even though it might be less efficient and it might not scale well yet, we're trying to see where we can go with it, right? So, I mean, we named our internal currency junk to be very explicit about this, right? We don't want you to host valuable currency on these things. We want to see what else you can do. And so, I mean, right now we're even exploring the idea of just ditching a blockchain altogether and building a distributed dApp on IPFS, where you can like pull down code and just run that code and push back the result, and everyone can have like a place where they host under their public key, the results of their computations, and other people can check things if they want. You don't have the same sort of consensus ledger that you get with a blockchain, but you could probably build a pretty interesting distributed application like that, right? So at these very early stages, it's more about exploring the tech and seeing where we can get with it. And sort of in parallel, we have all the research going on the consensus algorithms and the security of them, and those two streams will merge back together pretty soon, and then we can really get somewhere. Do you have a question?
So you mentioned 7 validators and round robin proof of stake. So where does stake fit? You just have 7 validators.
Can you repeat the question?
Good point, yeah. He asked, where does stake fit in if you only have 7 validators and it's round robin? So, I mean, proof of stake is just a term that really just means, you have a bunch of people signing off on things. In general, we weight them by how much of the coin they have, but in these weird cases where we don't necessarily have a coin on board, a lot of people think that's not legitimate and that you can't do it. I think there are and can be enough external incentives to make it a reasonable thing. I mean, it's really hard to understand humans, and
So we do just that, and we call it delegated proof of work, because we just have the same proof of work algorithm with a very low difficulty, and we
Yeah.
call it delegated. You delegate those $7.
because only certain people are allowed to do it. Right. So that's how Thelonious works right now. It actually doesn't have proof of stake in there. Technically, you could probably write some weird proof of stake thing because it sort of lets you script the consensus algorithm. But all that happens in the Ethereum virtual machine, which is still a little bit immature, but coming along really nicely. Anyways, yeah. Any more questions, or should I continue on? I'm not really sure. Oh yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
what did you mean by legal markdown?
Legal markdown, right. So this is a kind of heady idea. It's actually software that works right now. Basically, it's our CEO's little brainchild, I guess. He wrote some software to make it easier to sort of, he calls it dual integration between smart contracts and real legal contracts. And the idea, I think, down the road is that you can have assets on these chains that are legally recognized assets, even though they're only being so that any movement on the chain is legally enforceable as a transfer in real life. I don't know how that's going to work exactly, or if we're going to see that anytime soon. I think maybe, and that would be really cool. And that's one of these things that I think Eris is going to be pushing for once we have a little more of the tech under our belt. The legal markdown right now, it's basically like a simple way to lay out new legal contracts, and it also, I think for simple cases, will spit out a smart contract for you too. I don't know how advanced it is yet, I haven't played with it too much, but that's sort of the thinking, that you could legally enforce transitions on a blockchain to actually represent the movement of wealth in the real world. And I think it's a cool idea. Do you?
Yeah, I think I was just wondering, how do you map it to the real, because it changes by different areas, different regions, so
So
I
that's
think it's a cool idea. I was just trying to figure out.
That's going to be the really tricky thing, is internationalization, right? So you can imagine working at a local level or potentially at a national level. Really getting it to work internationally will be a lot trickier, but conceivably, if a bunch of countries wanted to get together to do this, they could arrange to create some sort of legal structure to make it possible. I don't know enough about the details to really put forward a proposal. What's that?
Just out of curiosity, how many years do you think we are away from a test case?
A test case
Of
legally integrated assets?
seeing whether these dual contracts are enforceable or not.
Yeah, I think it'll take a brave judge or a brave government to stand up and say, all right, let's try it out. And it could happen as early as this year. I mean, Blockstream is doing some interesting things, and potentially might have some interested parties that might want to do something like that. More and more, I think we're seeing politicians and governments start to respect this technology as sort of like a truly democratic technology that could bring, modern nation states back to their roots, so to speak, because we've kind of lost our way. A year might be optimistic. I think 5 years would be under-optimistic, or a little bit pessimistic. So yeah, it's coming soon.
Maybe
Yeah.
before that fully happens, would it be possible just to convert to natural language for a while, like doing a Google Translate essentially for a smart contract in natural language?
In natural language, before we move to legalese.
No, smart contract, converting smart contract cold into a natural language contract. Would that be just easier to be
What do you mean by natural language contract?
It's